Good evening. Welcome everybody. Today we will talk about the club, coon foot and the extensor bearing foot. The title picture is one of our graduates from April of this year, Pia Stith. She has a website, holistichoofcare.com, and is a very careful and detail-oriented trimmer. Excellent trimmer. For anybody who needs a trimmer in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Pia is the one to go to. So let's talk about the club foot. Any deviation from the regular arrangement of the bones in the equine distal limb is damaging to the horse. Often we find too steep an alignment of the distal bones. This steep alignment is combined with a steep orientation of the coffin bone, which means that the coffin bone rests on its sharp frontal edge. This may happen while the coffin bone is still parallel to the hoof wall, and here we have to make a distinction. When there is a separation of the coffin bone from the hoof wall, that means the coffin bone is no longer in alignment with the hoof wall, we speak of founder. We will visit that subject in a later lecture, which is actually next week. Evenly distributed forces in a healthy situation, but in a steep hoof the horse's weight is no longer distributed evenly. So here we have in this an even distribution of all the forces, with the hairline being at, this is not quite 30 degrees, it's a lousy drawing, but in a correct hoof, these are the evenly distributed forces. And when you have a high heel, then the coffin bone rises in the back with that high heel. It often is paired also, as we have learned, with high bars. So that all pushes the palmar processes up, but that does not mean that the frontal part of the coffin bone is not parallel to the hoof wall. And this situation means it's a club foot. A club foot is a hoof with steep bone alignment where the coffin bone is still parallel to the hoof wall, but no longer sitting crown parallel. That is when we talk about rotation. The veterinarians talk about rotation when there's also separation, but that is not always the same. We have to be a little careful here with that kind of distinction. There is separation and there is just rotation. And that's the situation we have here. On the top left, this situation here is what is normal. We were often talking about the harmonic curve, this shock absorber that is natural in the horse just because of its bone alignment, where every bone follows perfectly and all the joints fit. That is when we have a harmonic curve and when everything is in good balance. Such a horse, when he becomes weight-bearing, like in this picture, has some stress, and it's good stress, on the sesamoid bone, but this is only upon weight-bearing. when the horse actually moves. And all the other stresses are forced forward, come down here to a certain amount. The coronet band sinks in a bit, and the coffin bone sinks down a little bit. That is what we have learned in the past about normal function. Now in a clubfoot with a high heel and high bars, we have a little bit a different situation. While resting, this alignment here is much steeper than in a normal foot, and we often talk about, or farriers talk about often about an upright pastern. This horse has a very upright pastern. Horses that do have low heels do not have upright pasterns. It just doesn't happen. So here we see in this left lower picture, we see the clubfoot situation where the high bar and the high heel actually project pain on the navicular area, the deep digital flexor tendon, the navicular bursa, the impar ligament, and the navicular bone. And the coffin bone still comes down, but it also has a little bit of back push now. Not down just like it was here, but also back. And when the horse becomes fully weight-bearing, that is this picture, then this high bar and high heel actually pushes on here even more and now inflicts real pain. And you see how the joints here have changed, because this is no longer a helpful situation. So when the coffin bone is no longer ground parallel, then the hoof as soon as the hoof becomes weight bearing, the forces are transferred to the frontal part of the coffin bone, and the circumflexed artery is pinched shut. Depending how steep the hoof is, circulation in the area of the pinched circumflex artery is greatly diminished. Sole horn cannot be produced in this area, or production of sole horn is greatly diminished. So that is a side effect of the steep bone arrangement. The contour of the coffin bone shows later as bruising in such a steep arrangement. The reason for this bruising being further forward than where the coffin bone sits. The sole grows forward down, and the bruising only shows up months later. Remember, we have learned in the very beginning that the sole grows not only down but also forward. So by the time that you see this bruising here, this is already quite a bit older and has migrated from where the coffin bone actually sits and would make the impact to further forward, because that is how it grows forward. So what are the causes for clubfoot? Or for what it's worth, also for the other two, coonfoot and extensor bearing feet. First of all, it can be congenital. Sometimes a foal is born with a limb deformation. Chances for this to happen are higher when the chances for this to happen are higher when the mare is given time off during her pregnancy, so she's not moving enough for the foal to develop correctly. Most often these foals are born with a coonfoot, the fetlock often touching the ground. An extensor bearing situation also may happen. Both situations are remedied within days if the foal and mare are turned out and the foal has sufficient reason to move on appropriate terrain. And that is a lot of movement. Turned out 24/7 and reason to move. If there is no reason to move because the mare is stationary and the foal has no playmates, then you have to take this mare either on the saddle or you have to hand walk her and therefore facilitate movement for the foal. And then things will get better. This may look a little strange in the beginning, but they will get better if you give it the time and the exercise. That movement is really, really important. Foals have in general steep hoofs when they are born. That does not matter in the first few days, as the foal in the beginning is very light. The full development of the rump is missing. But when the foal starts to eat and it starts to grow, the joints start to develop under the weight and the harmonic curve begins to form. This leads to a slanted hoof form as well. In soft ground or in soft bedding and without sufficient reason to move, not only will the foal hoofs develop wrong, but the organs will not grow sufficiently either. The next cause for club foot, coon foot, and extensor bearing foot is improper trimming. Imbalanced trimming, shortening of the toes, very infrequent trimming, steep hoofs becoming ever steeper. If there is only one deformed hoof, it can be assumed that the cause is improper trimming or an injury. When we talk about improper trimming, just think what in general a farrier does to a hoof. He waits for 6 weeks till he comes, and then he takes the centimeter of hoof growth that has grown in and he nippers this off around the bottom very evenly. You can see it when after he has left that there is the entire rim of the hoof capsule laying on the ground if he nippers evenly. I've had this tons of times. Usually my dogs did run away with it, but that certainly does not remedy a situation like this and makes it only worse over time, because now the coffin bone situation, the coffin bone sits about like this, is dangerously close to the ground. So a farrier trim is not the remedy for this at all. Injury. In injured hoofs, the horse actually touches only careful with the toe, so the non-weight bearing heel grows much faster. If left uncorrected, this hoof grows very fast into a pathological shape. As a foal, today a lot of foals are raised in stalls on too small an acreage and with too little movement. The terrain is not always appropriate for the breed either. Usually too soft to offer proper resistance for the development of tendons, ligaments, and a correct hoof form. These are the general causes for a clubfoot. Another cause is that some horses seem to graze in a scissor-like stance. They have the one foot forward, and that becomes over a long time the flat foot, and the other foot stands backwards. And they graze like this all the time. Then they take a step forward and they stand like this again. then the foot that is backwards, is back, becomes clubby, and the foot that is forward becomes long and underrun, if not taken constantly good care of. This always taking good care of hoofs seems to be a little bit of a miracle to some horse owners. Trimming a barefoot hoof every 4 weeks is the minimum. Horses have, unless the horse is on hard terrain and moves a lot all by himself. That is a different situation. But if the horse is in the regular domestic environment, then they have to be trimmed about every 4 weeks if they have nothing majorly wrong with them. And then a skilled hoof care practitioner will always take care of these little imbalances and look at every hoof and balance it out. So that is very important. But I meet a lot of people when a lot of horses where the owner tells me that the horse has not been trimmed in quite a few months. And it shows. And this is not sufficient caretaking of a horse. Oops. This is a classical clubfoot, and it is usually not seen in conventional veterinary medicine as a problem, since the coffin bone is still parallel to the hoof wall. In this schematic you can see how this alignment of bones can actually lead to quite a few problems. As the coffin bone is no longer ground parallel, the deep digital flexor tendon actually has now an upward pull on it. The deep digital flexor tendon also has to be kept tight by the muscles it is attached to. They are up in the upper arm and in the lower arm and the shoulder region. Stress on the frontal laminar attachment may lead to founder. Frontal stress on the coffin joint, which means the joint surface is going to change. Destruction of the coffin bone tip. Stress on the shoulder and neck musculature. So we have stress here on the sesamoid bone area, in the fetlock joint. We have stress on the pastern joint. We have stress on the coffin joint with the extensor process here. And we have stress on the laminar attachment here. And when we talked about how the deep digital flexor tendon is attached to the coffin bone, it was in a ground parallel situation. It comes straight out of the coffin bone and then runs over the navicular bone up. So it cannot pull the coffin bone out of sync. But here we have now a coffin bone that is already out of sync. And the deep digital flexor tendon is no longer pulling straight. It is pulling at an upward pull. So that is a different situation in a high-heeled horse and can lead to the disaster that most people are really afraid of. So here, actually we have, I believe, looked at this picture already when we talked about contraction. And naturally, a high-heeled hoof usually comes with heel contraction. It is just too high. So this, you see, this is not a good frog. There's nothing working in this hoof. Here is the lateral picture, and this is the radiograph that belongs to it. The coffin bone is not ground parallel, but it is also not detached here. It really has the same distance to the wall. It is maybe a little bit sunk, but then again, most domestic horses are, the coffin bone is sitting a little bit lower in the hoof capsule, and with rotation this is even more prevalent. So then I found this picture, and this is not a clubfoot, even so it was labeled as a clubfoot. This is a high-heeled hoof that may very well, or actually is already, extensor bearing. This horse has more weight on the extensor tendon here than it has on the flexor tendon in the back. So also the extensor process is more forward than the tip of the coffin bone, and that tip of the coffin bone here is already totally destroyed, because this is a situation that was a long time in the making, and what the coffin bone actually tries to do, it tries to find a new ground parallel position here. And this looks pretty grim, and I also had the after trim pictures, and it didn't get any better. It is really important that in situations like this, not only is the problem properly identified, but it is also important that horses like this get trimmed very often. And horses like this get a lot of movement. And horses like this get a lot of body work. If you have such a crippled situation like this, you really have to do everything you can for this horse. And body work and movement are just as important as proper trimming. And you have to deal with this like you would with a physical injury, where you go later on to physical therapy. And without, we have a physical therapist on the call here, and without proper physical therapy that is repeated properly, nothing will change. And the crippled state will get worse. So, when we are trimming, it sounds easy enough. To trim a rotated hoof, a clubfoot, you just shorten the heels as they are too high. But there are a few other things we have to take into consideration. As I said, movement has to come first. Natural living conditions, increased metabolism. We have talked about metabolism not being functioning correctly when the body temperature is under 100 degrees. When we have an incorrect hoof form, parts of that hoof are supplied with blood, other parts are not. This is why you need to get, as soon as possible, a ground parallel coffin bone, so that the entire hoof is evenly supplied with blood, because only if it is evenly supplied with blood can horn grow evenly. And if you have a horse like with these club feet standing on its toe, then the frontal area of the foot does not have even blood supply. That also means that it's not growing right. And then the heel will always outgrow the toe. So you also have to facilitate increased circulation. We also need to facilitate some hoof mechanism. That hoof has to be brought to such a form that it starts moving again. And when we look back at this picture here, that hoof is not moving. So this is a challenge. It's a trimming challenge. The terrain should be correct for this situation. It should be non-concussive but firm. That is not easy to achieve unless you have lots of rubber or forgiving pasture that drains well. Here in the southeast we have coastal Bermuda that grows like a carpet. It's actually wonderful for horses like that. If you have that over firm ground, then this is a perfect environment. Non-concussive but firm. To shorten the heels alone is not enough. In this schematic you can see that the bars would be much too high then. If you would just take the heels down, then the bars would be standing out there. So you have to to shorten the bars as well. You may even in such a case have to over shorten the bars a little bit, as they're usually levered deep into the foot. And remember, and this picture doesn't depict this correctly, what I said when we talked about bar contraction, that the upright standing bar is so much more painful to the horse than the one that is actually laying sideways over the sole. And horses with club feet always have upright standing bars. So if you want this horse to lower the heel and actually stand on the heel again, you have to lower those bars a little bit more. When I say a little bit, I mean a little bit. It's something like a couple of millimeters, not a whole lot. Not the sticking bars out. Remember, the bars have a reason why they are there. They have to be there, and they have to function. When we shorten the heels as close as possible to the 3 centimeter height in order to get this coffin bone ground parallel, and at that point radiographs are really helpful. We could potentially run into a problem, and that problem is that because the heel grew so fast, it may have actually have an enlarged solar corium. And if you then go ahead and you trim the heel to this height in one setting, you may actually run into corium. And that again is not acceptable, because then the horse is going to be sore. So you have to be a little bit careful, which means you also have to come often enough in order to repair this damage. And when you don't have the cooperation of the owner, you're not going to get anywhere. Trimming those heels down is not enough. Trimming the bars needs to be done too. Again, movement and body work to release these very tight muscles are very, very important. They are as important as your trimming. And if you go there only every 4 weeks and take a centimeter off of the heel every 4 weeks, then in 4 weeks that centimeter has grown back and then some, because the horse is still standing on his toe, and therefore the heel will grow faster and the toe will grow slower, and you're not going to make any progress. Also in this case you have to have, in my opinion, you certainly can do out there what you want to, but I would want to have radiographs on this horse before I start trimming, and after I have trimmed, and then maybe every 6 months at least. If you have enough movement, if you trim often enough, if you have the right body work, and if you can't find a good body worker, you have to go out and take a course so that you can help your horse yourself. And doing this will resolve a clubfoot. And this altogether brings us to the next one, and that is a coon foot. In a coon foot, the alignment is different than in a clubfoot. This situation is also often called overextended flexor tendon, long sloping pastern, or low fetlock. Neither one of these descriptions is correct. The tendon has the same length, so it's not overextended, but the heel is high, and this is one way the horse can escape heel pain and the tendon stays tight. This alignment of the distal bones is often seen in the hind feet of gaited horses. In a coon foot, the heel is high, therefore the tendon would have usually some slack that would have to be pulled up by the muscle. Horses with a weak musculature cannot pull the tendon tight, but by letting the fetlock sink down, the tendon becomes tight without muscular involvement. Ossifications where ligaments insert on bone are usually the result for the unnatural stresses of this situation. These ossifications again happen here on the coffin joint, on the pastern joint, and in the fetlock joint on the back. And we have the same problem here, that eventually this hoof wall parallel situation will get stretched and break loose. The pictures show the weak hind end musculature in a coon-footed horse. You can see that this horse has a very weak hind end, which would need a lot of work on a slope in order to strengthen the hindquarters, so that the sunk fetlock can come into a correct alignment again. Joint adaptation in these three joints may also be a limiting factor for immediate success. Whenever a joint has adapted and changed already, you must assure physical therapy, which means a lot of movement on firm non-concussive ground to restore correct alignment of the joints and body work. This is the theme of the day, movement and body work, and frequent trimming. This horse has been already trimmed, and when I said I would like to see after pictures after the horse has been restored, I got told that I can't have those because the horse hasn't been restored, because the owner did not move the horse. And that is something we cannot control. Frequent trimming of the hoof to ensure a tight new growth from the top is important. If your trimming intervals are too long, you are creating a connection that is not tight enough, and you will not be able to return the horse to full health. If the situation of high heels and a short toe is present for a long time, you will see that the laminar connection starts to suffer, and the coffin bone will separate from the hoof wall. That is founder, also known as rotation with separation. whereas in a clubfoot we have rotation without separation. And that brings us to the extensor bearing foot, in which the heel is usually higher than the toe, or the horse experiences such extreme heel pain that he won't weigh the heel at all anymore. Shock absorption is virtually non-existent in an alignment like that. In this schematic, the pyramidal process, let's just go back to this one. You see that you have stresses here now, not on the back of the fetlock anymore. Now the stress has moved to the front. But you have also stress again on the pastern joint, certainly on the coffin joint, including the extensor process, and there is enormous stress in the laminar attachment. So here in this schematic is the situation with extreme heel pain, where actually the coffin, the extensor process is still further back than the tip of the coffin bone, but the fetlock joint is pushed forward in order to avoid this here, to avoid this heel pain. The alignment of the bones can vary in extensor bearing hoofs. High bars are pushing the palmar process of the coffin bone up and the coffin bone out of alignment. Areas marked in red are where the biggest stressors are. Ligament insertion points will soon be surrounded with calcifications to stabilize the pathological situation. In this situation, the pyramidal process is then pushed in front of the coffin bone. And here we have a extensor bearing donkey. When you look at the left foot, this is a true clubfoot. It's not extensor bearing yet, but it's on its way. This here is totally extensor bearing. The donkey does not put any weight on the back of the hoof here anymore. And these are the X-rays that show that the extensor process here is pushed forward of the tip of the coffin bone. That actually goes this way. And this is the same hoof, lateral and medial. No, this here is lateral and this one is medial. Looks a little bit different because of the different light, but it's the same hoof. So this is a really sad situation. It unfortunately happens often in donkeys. They get notoriously bad hoof care, and that is very sad, I think. Here we have two different extensor bearing feet. This one here on the left side is the one where the fetlock is pushed forward, where the horse does not really sink into this alignment. This is not a harmonic curve anymore. And here we have a extended situation where the entire foot is not weight bearing anymore. The horse stands entirely on the tip. And this is an interesting situation. I actually was consulted on this horse over 2 years ago. And this is when the left radiograph was sent to me. And I was asked, what would you do? And I suggested at the time to lower the heel more, to get expert hoof care, to move the horse a lot, to detox the horse, and to get the horse expert muscle work, expert body work. Not too long ago, this horse, 3 months ago, this same horse, and I thought, boy, this looks familiar. And I dug it up. The same horse showed up on one of the Yahoo groups. Now she looks like this. Well, obviously she has gotten her coffin bone ground parallel, but if she cannot stand on that heel because either the heels are too low, the bars are too high, sorry. Either the bars are too high or her muscular situation is so severe that she cannot bring that hoof down anymore, then, you know, all the trimming and having the coffin bone ground parallel doesn't help. So I find this really interesting. Same veterinarian made the x-rays. They are exactly 2 years apart. And this just shows how something deteriorates when it is not taken care of at the right time. Because right here, this doesn't look too bad, believe it or not, but this isn't all that bad. This is a little bit rotated, taking this down and just giving this horse the right living conditions and all that, but I don't think the owner was ready for this. So much about extensor bearing situations. All three of those, extensor bearing, coon-footed, and club-footed, really need a lot of work and should not be taken lightly. So now I have a story for you that has happened in Australia. And this is from 2002. The story of Lily. And I have to read this to you because I don't want to take things out of context. This story was started by Richard Oberlander, who was at the time a student in the barefoot course of Dr. Strasser, the only one that ever took place in Australia. And out of this course came 5 or 6 trimmers, of which only one is still certified, and through Dr. Strasser. But this group was very excited about this opportunity to help all kind of horses, and boy did they take horses on that nobody else dared to. And this is a really interesting story. So he writes, Lily is a 21-month-old quarter horse filly who was rescued from certain euthanasia nearly 10 months ago. The sole survivor of a twin birth, Lily was confined to a small wet paddock early on in life when she appeared to be developing some sort of problem in her limbs. However, this only accentuated the issue, and the owner pursued other methods of treatment, including traditional veterinary medicine and orthopedic shoes. When the problem did not begin to resolve, it seemed that euthanasia was soon to be the only option left. However, when a client told me about this young filly, we quickly contacted the owners and presented them with an option to save little Lily. On October 25, 2002, Lily arrived at an arranged halfway point where she would spend the night before continuing her journey to my property a further 3.5 hours away. Lily was forced to stand as a cat might while stretching. Her front limbs were placed far in front of her. Due to joint adaptation in her limbs, Lily's hoofs rolled forward onto the face of the hoof wall, and the heels did not bear any weight at all. Due to the problems in her limbs, Lily was also found to have almost no back muscles to assist in correcting her posture. Dr. Strasser, who was present at the initial treatment, advised a great deal of body treatment and movement, in addition to frequent trimming. The first trim required approximately 4 to 5 hours of work where numerous ways of getting Lily's hoofs to lower the heels were tried. In the end, a vast improvement was made on the original condition and Lily was returned to her paddock with several other equines for the night. 8 months down the track, Lily has come a long way and is far better off than she might have been without the specialized treatment. Her right front hoof now sits completely on the ground and the left front is well on the way to proper weight bearing. Lily is quite comfortable in the paddock with her equine friends and is very much the active young horse. While still a long way from optimal hoof form and body condition, Lily has proven to many people that there are few situations when it is all too much and that this type of trimming really works. As of February 2004, Lily is now cared for by Julie Lytle. She is certainly a happy little horse and we are pleased with her amazing progress so far. Yes, in 2005 these are the same feet. The left front still cannot weight the heels fully yet, but the changes have been dramatic. Lily is truly an amazing case. She is happy and friendly, also sometimes she thinks she is a human. At no stage during the time that I have looked after Lily, this is Julie Lytle now, since January 2004 have I thought that Lily was not comfortable and happy. Due to the problems that Lily suffered with her hoofs, they simply have not grown and developed to be of a correct size or shape. Lily is sound and runs around with the herd, but I'm not sure that she will ever be useful as a riding horse or for breeding. That being said, we are happy to have her, and she certainly seems happy enough to be alive. I thought this was important to see what can be done, and we will see in the next few weeks a few more cases where you would say, oh, this is beyond repair, but it can be done. But again, this horse was taken over by somebody who's dedicated enough to go all the way. And that is always very, very important. So that concludes our session for tonight. I would like to invite your questions, if you have any. If not, I go to bed early. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask questions. That was a joke. And please raise your hand so I can unmute you. Nobody? Catherine. Let me see. Let me make this bigger. Oh, Catherine asked what was the brand of hoof knife that I recommended a few weeks ago, and if I stretch here enough, maybe I can find the... no, that's not the one. I thought I have a card here somewhere of this company. They are Ringel hoof knives, R-I-N-G-E-L. Ringel hoof knives, and I believe the website is ringelcustomknives.com, if I'm not mistaken. But, oh, here it is. I found it. Yes, it's ringelcustomknives.com, R-I-N-G-E-L. One out of the morning group has bought one of those knives, but she hasn't gotten it yet, so we have no feedback. And Jennifer Kirchner asked if there are any bodywork courses I would recommend. Yes, those of Dino Fredet. That is, Dino is D-I-N-O, Fredet is F-R-E-D-D-E-R-D. And the good thing about Dino is that he puts hoof health and a correctly balanced hoof and the horse on top in a relationship, which most massage therapists or body workers do not do. I have been now to two Jim Masterson clinics, and while the work he is doing is really good, he really doesn't care what kind of hoof is under the horse, and that just won't do. And Dino really makes a big point about how important a properly balanced hoof is. He also makes a big point about the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint that hinges the jaw, how important this is, this being the master joint. And Carla just said that she believes it's Dino Fredet with 2 T instead of 2 D. That could absolutely be. Thank you for that. I don't have it in front of me, so you know these Germans with their weird accents. That's where it comes from. Yes, Shira.
I was wondering, you were talking about the clubfoot, the causes, one of them possibly being congenital. But you said that basically that happens when the mare is just given time off during pregnancy, she doesn't move around enough. I was wondering if, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, a mare with a clubfoot shouldn't be bred because she will pass that on to her foal. And I was wondering if that was part of that congenital problem.
Yeah, well, that, you know, Shira, that always brings the question up, do they all drink from the same water? Are they all raised in the same deep bedding? You know, in the beginning, when the foal is born, it's not a clubfoot. That's the way they are. They have upright little feet that are inverted. And then if they are all raised the same way, and they have already, they are hard-hoofed and they have already that propensity to be that way, then maybe they get this again. There was a Trakehner stallion many years ago, he's long dead, who supposedly produced turned-in, toed-in horses. And I have seen actually a couple of these turned-in horses, and that little mare that I had, that I showed you, that was so turned in, came from the stallion. But I now believe that these were the horses that were raised on that same farm and had the same farrier. Yeah, so what people say, you really would have to go into the situation and really ask questions. How was this foal raised? That you saw that having the same clubfoot as the dam? Or is he grazing in a scissor stance all the time? Maybe he learned this from the dam. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I am not a breeder. I have never in my life bred a horse. And I will not. Won't happen. I don't have enough property for that. I have only 17 acres. That's not enough to raise a horse. No matter what the people that raise horses on 1 acre say, it is not enough to raise a healthy horse. They have to have room to run. They need to run in the company of other little horses. They need to play, and they need to run uphill and downhill. I have trained for years the young stock from a Belgian warm blood breeder in West Virginia. And this lady had 200 acres that she had her small herd running on. And boy, when they came to me, they were so strong, and they had perfectly straight feet, not a conformation fault inside, because the way they were brought up and not because of the excellent breeding stock that she had. That lacked a little bit on to be desired. But so you have to ask the people that say that more questions. And we will in our training get to that.
Okay.
I will stoke you up for that. Okay. Nobody else? This is it. Sandy?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. As you know, I wrote quite extensively and studied quite extensively on the DSLD, the horse with the coon foot, the gaited horse that I have. And basically, Dr. Strasser said if you couldn't fix it in the first few months of life, it was unfixable. And I don't know that sometimes with those horses, it involves a whole lot more issues as they're growing up, where someone has waited, has set too far back on them, and they've compensated along with the high heels. And it tends to affect all the joints, all the hip joint and the knee joint. I mean, they get post-legged.
Absolutely.
And the unfortunate thing is it seems like that we don't get to see these horses or work with them until they're older. But
Right.
I think that we get a little bit excited about fixing something that we really can't fix, and we need to concentrate on getting the people to raise the horses properly. And if we can get to ones that are younger, then we might can fix them like this horse. But
Right.
I just don't know that we can fix some of these club feet that are 20 years old.
Right. And if you got a horse, you're absolutely right. And not everything can be fixed with a good trim. There is so many other things that also need to be done and need to be taken care of. This is not everything when it comes to us can be remedied anymore. And I had a few of those that just were beyond repair. And if this little Lily hadn't been only 2 years old, she would not have made it either. If this horse would have been 5, 6 years old and looked like this, then this would probably not have been a good idea to fix that. All the ones that I have seen that have been extensor bearing like this and were walking on the front of their hoofs and got well. There was one, I have a study of one that was done with shoes and the bone alignment was changed. But this was also a 2-year-old. They have to be young to fix such extreme things. And I only want to share this with you because this group had so much enthusiasm for everything, and therefore it was really, really important. Thank you for that, Sandy. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Going home? Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for participating. Very full class tonight. And I see you next week when we talk about Founder, finally. Have a good evening. Goodbye.